This no cash bail thing is nonsense. It's ridiculous. It's not working. If we could let the criminals out in those neighborhoods of those people who claim that no cash bail is racist, they would understand, because their homes would be broken into, their businesses would be broken into. Ultimately, they talked about defunding the police, and so it demoralized our law enforcement.
Yes, that was Virginia Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears on this program last month on the disastrous impact progressive crime policies have had on communities across the country. In New York City alone, once dubbed America's safest big city under former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, overall crime is up nearly 35% from a year ago. The backing of bail reform and cashless bail by New York State Democrats has seen violent offenders released back onto the streets mere hours after arrest. Despite the sharp rise in crime, New York Governor Kathy Hochul has doubled down on keeping bail reform as is. She wants cashless bail. Her Republican challenger, Lee Zeldin, is looking to unseat her this November and bring law and order back to the Empire State. Joining me right now is the man himself, New York Congressman Lee Zeldin. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for being here. I have your op-ed in the New York Post in front of me. This was from last week, where you say, as New York's resources are overwhelmed, Hochul must push Biden to secure the border. Tell us about those resources and what has been the impact of all of these illegal migrants in New York.
You're hearing from Mayor Eric Adams in New York City about how the shelter system is being more overwhelmed than ever before. We're reading stories about how some of these migrants are now getting put into hotels in Times Square. It costs not just from the housing standpoint, but also there are the costs on the healthcare standpoint, from the education standpoint, and the city's just strapped all across the entire country, really. You're starting to have more and more people speaking out. However, every time you hear from a mayor in New York City or the governor of New York or the mayor in Washington, D.C. or Chicago, think of these border communities, these border states, how desperate they must be, because this is their reality all day, every day for a very long time. So the federal government needs to finish construction of the border wall, end catch and release, enforce the Remain in Mexico policy. It needs to support our Customs and Border Patrol agents and stop incentivizing and rewarding illegal entry, and that's at the federal, state, and local level.
Well, look, after 9/11, and we just marked the 21 years after 9/11 the other day, but we came up with something called the terrorist watch list after September 11th, and America suffered its worst attack from terrorists. And what we understand about this terrorist data and this terrorist watch list was that under President Trump and President Bush, we had 3 or 4 terrorists apprehended at the southern border. But under Joe Biden and this wide open border, we've already had 66 people apprehended at the southern border who were on the terrorist watch list. Now I believe we are watching 81 people who were apprehended in one way or another as a result of the southern border. What can you tell us about the crime spikes? Is it partly related to the wide open border?
It absolutely is. There are crimes that are being committed, additional crimes beyond just somebody coming into the country illegally. That's the reality right now, and it's being somewhat reported. You talk about the cost. It's not just about individuals who come, but they might be bringing fentanyl, the drug trafficking, the sex trafficking, busting an MS-13 gang, and they're engaged in some type of sex trafficking. The way that these gangs are financing their operations are often engaged in other illegal activities. So the strain is also on the law enforcement perspective, too. The solution is at our border. I feel bad for these states that feel like they need to operate as if they're also the federal government, deploying their own troops to their own border and not being backed up by this federal government. And as far as ICE goes, they want to be able to work with state and local law enforcement. In New York, for example, they passed a new law called the Green Light Law, which prevents the federal authorities from being able to look into the DMV databases. The information sharing is key. Law enforcement at all levels of government should be able to work together to make sure that our country is safe.
So what can you do about it? I mean, look, we're looking at the polls. You're still behind Kathy Hochul. When you look at the mayor of New York City and the last election, it was the smallest electorate ever to come out, and yet still Bill de Blasio won. So how are you going to get a largely Democrat population to come out and vote for you? And if they do, what are you going to do to change things?
Maria, Democrats, just like Republicans and independents, are fed up with not feeling safe on our streets. I was just riding a New York City subway a couple days ago with a guy who is Jewish who talks about how he takes his yarmulke off when he rides the subway because he's afraid of being attacked, and his wife doesn't ride the subway at all. About a week ago, I was speaking to a couple where they used to be able to walk the streets of Manhattan, go 15, 20 blocks on a beautiful night. You and I were talking about this on air a couple days ago on your morning show. And they can go 2 blocks and they're calling an Uber. So this is a reality regardless of party. Hugging a pole, grabbing a guardrail because you're afraid of being pushed in front of an oncoming subway car. My first act, my first day I'm sworn into office, is telling the Manhattan District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, that he's going to be fired. You were just playing that clip from the Virginia Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears talking about cashless bail. Well, here in New York, we've seen cashless bail as a failure. It's caused crime to increase. It needs to be repealed. Judges need discretion to weigh dangerousness. It is pro-criminal laws, DAs refusing to do their jobs, judges refusing to do theirs in some other cases, and people less safe as a result. So we in New York, regardless of whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whether you're from a red county or a blue county, all of us as New Yorkers are taking control of our destiny to be able to save this state, to be able to take back our streets, to back our men and women in law enforcement again. And for people who are thinking about fleeing, instead they can stay here in New York and not have to go elsewhere for their own safety and for their family and for their future, on the economics, on freedom, and more.
Well, it is also an economic story. You've seen a lot of big businesses flee. We're expecting now job cuts from Wall Street. Goldman Sachs announced cuts, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America. What does the budget look like, and how can you get, is it just about crime, or is it also other issues that are causing people to flee? And I know you wanted to debate Kathy Hochul. Have you gotten an answer in terms of a debate between you and Hochul? Because the New York Post had a cover the other day saying that she's pretty much chickening out.
Yeah, she's earning her nickname as Scaredy Cat. She has not yet accepted any of these debate requests. I accepted multiple debate requests that have come in out of the gate. The contempt that she has for this process, for voters, is something that voters should certainly not be rewarding her with a full 4-year term. She wants to sit in this seat, but if you don't agree with her, she actually declared that I was no longer a New Yorker because I was challenging her. She demanded I get on a bus and I go to Florida. Other issues are important. We need to reverse the state's ban on the safe extraction of natural gas, to approve new pipelines. We need to bring spending under control. We should have a state spending cap. Over the course of these last 3 years, we've seen tens of billions of dollars in new annual spending, and even if it's paid for with a one-shot, the government in Albany right now, one-party rule, they look at it as the new baseline. We need to cut taxes across the board. The estate tax in New York should be eliminated. Income tax across the board should go down as well, because people of all walks of life, are being pushed out of this state.
Yeah, well, that's not what Joe Biden is planning. He's actually planning on tax increases in the next year. But we'll be watching your efforts, Congressman. Thanks very much. Lee Zeldin is joining us this morning.
Thank you, Maria.
We'll take a look at New York further.